On May 10, 2024, Nintendo announced something that sort of came out of left field for me. To celebrate the 1-year anniversary of Tears of the Kingdom, they will release a small handful of Zelda products, including a replica of the Master Sword, the official Tears of the Kingdom soundtrack, and last but certainly not least, Tears of the Kingdom Masterworks, a 464-page hardcover book containing concept art, storyboards, development history, story and lore exposition, and more. In other words, it's the equivalent of, well, Masterworks, also known as Creating a Champion in some parts of the world, a book all about Breath of the Wild's development history. The reason why this came as a pretty big surprise to me personally is because Tears of the Kingdom already has a pretty extensive art book, which, as you may remember, was leaked to the public several months before the game's official launch. It was part of the Tears of the Kingdom Collector's Edition, and I figured that this was going to be it for the game in terms of literature, especially after Nintendo announced that the game would not receive DLC of any kind. But thankfully this is not the case, and Tears will in fact get the same treatment as its predecessor. Of course, that raises the question, what exactly will this book do for Tears of the Kingdom? How much of an impact will it have on the game's lore? Will it clear up some of the questions and uncertainties that were left unanswered after the end credits? And could it quote-unquote fix some of the plot holes and inconsistencies which have been the subject of debate ever since the game came out? Obviously, until we actually see the finished product, all we can do is speculate, which is for the most part what I'm going to be doing for today's video. Now, that being said, we did receive some information about its contents from official sources, and so I want to start with all the stuff we do know about the book so far, including some basic translations of the Japanese texts, and then gradually move into more speculative territory as we go, which also includes my personal thoughts and expectations. Now, please note that all the information featured here pertains to the Japanese edition of Masterworks only, because so far there's been no confirmation from any official sources regarding plans for other languages, including an English version. I will touch upon localization at some point, but that already ventures more into the speculative side of things, so I will save that for later. It's also important to keep in mind that any and all information is subject to change, as they do make it clear that some of the stuff Nintendo shared so far, like the 4 sample pages, are, quote, still in production. So let's start with the basics. The full Japanese title is The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom Masterworks. It'll be a hardcover just like the other books. It has 464 pages, which is 40 pages longer than Creating a Champion. It is scheduled to release on Friday, August 30, 2024, and it's a collaborative effort between Nintendo, Onbit Limited, and Takuma Shoten, which, if you've seen my video about the other Zelda books, will probably sound familiar. And if you haven't seen the video and are interested in how books like these come to be and who these companies and people are, I can definitely recommend giving it a watch. Moving on, the book will cost around 6,930 yen, which is approximately $45 US, shipping not included, of course. For those who don't want to wait for localization, it will be available for purchase outside of Japan, but only via third-party websites like iTaikuji and PlayAsia, which I will link to in the description for those who are interested. I also want to clarify real quick that even though it may seem that way from some of these promotional images, Tears of the Kingdom Masterworks is not part of a bundle of sorts. Besides being part of the anniversary celebration, it has no correlation to the Master Sword replica or the OST. They are separate products with their own release dates. I guess it's possible that they may get bundled together into a single anniversary edition or something in the future, but there's currently no evidence for that. As for the structure of the book, according to some rough Google translations, it'll be split up into 3 chapters: artwork, reference materials, and story, which is very similar to how Creating a Champion is structured, as it too is divided into 3 chapters. In this case, illustrations, development, and history, which basically comes down to the same thing. It starts with a general artwork section, then dives into specific characters, items, locations, and so on, and then ends with a chapter all about story. And speaking of story, it's been confirmed that Masterworks will feature a new and updated rendition of the history of Hyrule. In other words, we're getting some sort of timeline update. However, before you get too excited and expect to see something like this, it's worth pointing out that Creating a Champion also featured a timeline of sorts, but it was nothing like the ones from Hyrule Historia or the Zelda Encyclopedia. Instead, it's more of a summary of Breath of the Wild's history, with every other game condensed into a single mythical era. As such, it was kept ambiguous as to where exactly the game would fit, except that it takes place after every other game in the series. The wording used on the official Japanese Nintendo store neither confirms nor denies that there will be an updated version of the Encyclopedia timeline, so there's a good chance that it's simply gonna be the Creating a Champion timeline with Tears of the Kingdom's history added to it and not much else. That being said, whatever this new timeline will end up being, we can probably still garner some interesting information from it. Perhaps a few new puzzle pieces to construct a new fan-made timeline. The official Japanese Zelda website, also known as the Zelda Portal, did update their timeline not too long ago, adding Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom at the very end of the chronology as separate entities. It still doesn't confirm which of the 3 timeline branches they belong in, or if it's a merger of the timeline or a separate reality altogether, but who knows, maybe the new Masterworks will shed some more light on this. The official English website has yet to update their chronology, so maybe this will happen as soon as the book comes out. We'll just have to wait and see. In regards to the artwork, it states that Masterworks will feature never-before-seen illustrations, including some that were specifically made for this book. It will also include storyboards for the memory cutscenes, which we never got to see for Breath of the Wild's memories, as they were absent from creating a champion. I also expect to see some of the illustrations that have been made public in the past but so far haven't been featured in any official prints, like these early depictions of the motion capture process, some of the stuff they showed at the GDC, this phone wallpaper of Link and Zelda, and these never-before-seen illustrations of Yunobo and Zelda, which were sourced from a recent edition of Nintendo Dream magazine. Next up, let's talk about the translations that have been done so far. In addition to the book's announcement, Nintendo provided a little sneak peek in the form of a front cover design and a total of 4 sample pages. Once again, these have been confirmed to be in production still, so they may differ from the final product. But of course, that hasn't stopped fans from translating them regardless. Now, for the sake of accuracy, I will be drawing from 3 separate sources. First are the translations provided by Zelda Universe and Zelda Lore, both of which will be in the description. Second is a translation I've commissioned from a native Japanese speaker I'm acquainted with. Now, I did not use her translations as a basis because the individual in question is actually unfamiliar with the series lore, so it's more of an alternative source I used to cross-reference with the other translations to see how accurate they are. And as a final measure, I also ran all the images through Google Translate and ChatGPT. In conclusion, aside from a few synonyms or sentences that are phrased a little differently, I did not find any notable discrepancies, so the translations are pretty accurate as far as I'm aware. First up, we have page 24 and 25, which features various artwork of Link in his new champion's tunic, including the one that was ultimately used for the box art. And besides that, there's not much to say since it doesn't feature any text aside from the one in the bottom right corner, which simply reads Link/rough idea or rough draft. Moving on, we have pages 72 and 73, which focus on Zelda's new design. More specifically, her subterranean exploration equipment, as it's called, and of course, her new hairstyle. The written texts are, for the most part, little bits of feedback the artist received during the design process, like a request to change some of the details on the clothing, for example. More importantly, we see the first developer's note show up here. These types of notes are plentiful in creating a champion as well, and are basically short explanations and quotes directly from a Zelda staff member, usually someone who worked on whatever is on display on that particular page. You'll notice that there's currently no name attributed to it like there is in creating a champion, but I'm pretty sure this will be added later. As for the text itself, the artist expresses their excitement for Zelda's new appearance and the audience reaction to it, as well as how they experimented with all the various hairstyles. It also explains that the outfit she wears during the opening segment was specifically made for the purpose of cave exploration, and that it's actually inspired by the cloak worn by King Rome in the previous title. So it's essentially Zelda's way of paying homage to her late father, which I think is a pretty cool detail. Moving on, we have page 108 and 109, which contain proposal drafts for Rauru and Sonia. It doesn't feature a lot of text besides a few scribbles, which are once again feedback and short descriptions of what's being depicted, and that's about it. Probably the most interesting thing on this page is that in one of the sketches, Sonia is depicted with rounded ears as opposed to the typical pointy ears. Now, I'm pretty sure this is just a quick doodle one of the artists made, so we probably shouldn't look too deep into it, but it is a peculiar design choice, I guess. Last but not least, we have the most interesting page by far, and judging from the high page number, 310, we can assume that this page is either from the story chapter, or more likely the tail end of the material section, which in creating a champion focuses on specific locations. The focus here is on Hyrule Castle's underground, specifically the cave system where the opening segment takes place. In regards to the artwork, most of the areas depicted here are ones we recognize from the game itself. That is, all except this one, which shows a chamber that doesn't exist in the actual game. It depicts Link and Zelda in front of an impressive looking entrance, and I'm sure most of you will recognize it from somewhere else, namely the 2019 reveal trailer, which features a brief shot of a similar looking structure. Seeing it again here from a new vantage point makes me feel a bit nostalgic, and I really think it's a shame that they didn't include this entrance in the actual game, because it looks pretty damn amazing in this illustration. As for the translations, first up we have the main title and text, which reads as following. Hyrule Castle's underground temple. Just before the cataclysmic events, Link and Zelda enter to investigate the source of the miasma, which emerged from the underground and had adverse effects on the human body. Entry into the castle's underground was forbidden, even for members of the royal family. At the deepest part, remnants of Zonai heritage and murals from mythological times were preserved. As far as information goes, it's nothing we didn't already know from the game itself, but there you go. The other shorter texts don't hold any relevant information either, and are simply descriptions of whatever's on display, like the Zonai statue and the various rooms and hallways present in the underground. I guess the only mildly interesting thing is this little excerpt, which says beginning playable with a question mark, perhaps an indication that they weren't always sure if the beginning should have playable segments or instead only cutscenes. Luckily, there's one more element present on this page, and it's by far the most interesting thing in all the sample pages combined. It's referred to as a secret file and contains the first and only bit of lore that is completely new. It shows a diagram of Hyrule Castle and its adjacent underground cave system, and according to the text at the bottom, it's part of a memo the staff members shared around during the development process. It basically outlines the structure and role of the underground and how it relates to the castle above. Now, we already knew that the castle and the caves below it share a connection in that they serve as a seal to keep Ganondorf imprisoned. It's even been theorized that this seal doubles as a kind of power plant, a mechanism that extracts Ganondorf's miasma, purifies it, and then converts it into energy. And well, the diagram confirms that this is indeed exactly how it works. This pyramid-like device on the ceiling, which is called a purification unit in the game's files, connects directly to the massive column the castle is suspended on, and is what the purified energy flows through. Like I said, all this stuff was hinted at and theorized about already, but it's always nice to get some confirmation from the developers themselves, and that this is indeed what they had in mind. What we did not know, however, is that the underground cave system we ventured through in the opening segment actually has an original overarching name, that being the Temple of Light. Now, if you played previous Zelda games, you'll know that the Temple of Light is closely affiliated with the Sacred Realm, as well as the Sage of Light, aka Rauru. So the name is definitely fitting given Raru's presence in this story. It's just a name of a location and not much else, but it has a lot of historical and cultural importance in Hyrule, and I hope the book will explain more about it, like how Ganondorf and the sages ended up down here in the first place, what purpose it served back in ancient times before the imprisoning war. Was it purely ceremonial or spiritual, or did it have another function altogether? Why is there even more Zonai architecture far below it, and why does it lead to a seemingly bottomless void? We also don't see it in the distance when Zelda overlooks ancient Hyrule, so was it always located deep underground, or was it originally located somewhere else? Perhaps in the skies above, like many of the other Zonai architecture? And of course, does it relate in any way to the Temple of Light from Ocarina of Time or the Sacred Realm? It's funny how just knowing the name of a place can evoke so many questions, and I really hope the book will shed some more light on it. But of course, that remains to be seen. So before I get into my personal thoughts about the book, let's quickly address localization, which is at best based on educated guesses because again, there's currently no official source to confirm anything. That being said, based on past experience, it's very likely that there are other language editions in the pipeline as well. It's been the case for every single book so far, and I think it's safe to say that they will continue that trend. Now, I don't know much about the other language versions like Spanish or French or whatever, so I can only speak for the English version, despite being from the Netherlands. There's never been a Dutch version for any of these books. We simply get whatever the US and the UK are getting. For creating a champion, it took about a year after the Japanese release for the English edition to hit store shelves, and I think we should expect something similar for this project. Definitely 2025 at the earliest. I did reach out to Patrick Thorpe from Dark Horse Comics, who was the lead editor for the English edition of all 4 books and who was kind enough to agree to an interview for a previous video. But as expected, he currently has no information to share. And even if he did, I doubt he would be allowed to talk about it it until after the project wraps up. I am fairly certain that if an English localization is in the works, Dark Horse will be the ones to do it, just like they've done for all the other books. Now, a year may seem like a long time, but there's a lot that goes into localization. It's definitely not as simple as running it through a translator like I did. Again, if you're interested in this process, I can refer you to my video about the canonicity of the Zelda books, as there's a whole section devoted to localization, including the interview with Patrick himself. Now, with that in mind, I do expect to see a huge fan effort to translate Masterworks into English long before it happens through official means. So for the impatient ones among you, there is at least that to look forward to. Several people in the community have already shown interest in this undertaking, and I don't think it's a matter of if, but rather when they can get it done. The Zelda series has seen a massive surge in popularity in the past few years, and I can easily see this becoming one of the biggest localization efforts in the history of the community. Not to mention that tools like ChatGPT, Google Translate, and other translation programs are much more accurate and accessible than they were back in 2017, which definitely helps too. I myself am not well versed in the Japanese language whatsoever, but I will do my best to contribute in whatever way I can, and you can bet that I'll be following this process like a hawk. One final thing to address when it comes to localization is the title of the book. I'm not entirely sure which countries got which title when it came to the previous book, but as mentioned before, the Japanese and English titles are very different. So I'm curious to see if Masterworks will once again have an alternate title for Western audiences, and if so, what that title will be. I mean, the previous book was named after the champion, so I don't know, maybe something related to the sages or perhaps the Zonai, who knows. But I think it's highly likely that some of us will come to know the book under a different name. And the same may apply to the cover, because historically the covers for the Japanese and English editions differ as well. So it remains to be seen if they will stick with the black and green or if they will take a different approach. Personally, I love the darker design, and it presents a nice contrast with the white edition of Creating a Champion, which is the most common version out there. So with all that said, let's wrap things up with a few personal thoughts. Now, I'm not really huge on video game merch, for the most part anyway. In fact, almost all the merch I own fits on 2 small shelves, and most of it were gifts. But for the Zelda books, I will always make an exception, since they are kind of a must-have for any Zelda theorist. So I think most of my returning viewers know how I feel about the story and lore in Tears of the Kingdom, but for those who don't, I've been, I guess, mildly disappointed would be the most accurate way to phrase it. The story and world building did not meet my expectations, and when I say expectations, I'm not talking about my own theories being invalidated or anything like that, which is what some people seem to think for some reason. Believe it or not, I do not theorize about Zelda for the sake of stroking my own ego or to be some kind of Zelda lore prophet. I would much rather be wrong and positively surprised than to predict an entire premise before I even touch a single button on the controller. When I make theories or predictions, I'm just having fun. That's the extent of it, really. And I think this goes for pretty much every Zelda creator out there, big and small. We are used to getting things wrong. In fact, being wrong should be the expected outcome for most Zelda theories, because at the end of the day, a lot of it is based on interpretation and circumstantial evidence. Not to mention that keeping things vague has been part of the very nature of the series since, well, pretty much the beginning. Even the developers themselves emphasize time and time again that they want to leave room for interpretation and creative thinking. Now, that being said, I do believe that there's a limit to how much information you can omit from a story or world before it becomes too difficult to work with or even care about. Ambiguity only works if there's something there to nudge you in the right direction, some nuggets of truth or discernible data you can use to get an idea going. And not just for the sake of theorizing, but to get players invested and eager to learn more about the world in general. The audience has to be convinced that there's at least some form of intent or thought behind it on the side of the developers, and I think this is where Tears of the Kingdom unfortunately fell short. Yes, there are small hints here and there that pertain to certain locations, thematics, or events, but they are few and far between, especially compared to its predecessor. When I construct Zelda theories, I like to take the approach of that of an amateur archaeologist, historian, or geologist, which means there has to be something there to support my claims, or else I might as well just make up stories without any substantial evidence whatsoever. And a lot of Zelda games do make this possible to some extent. In Breath of the Wild, for example, even without creating a champion in mind, it was possible to unravel how the Great Calamity played out despite only witnessing a very small portion of it through cutscenes. The path of destruction, how far the Guardians managed to advance, and where the biggest battles took place, all of this could be inferred purely from the environment. All creating a champion did was provide a little more context, stuff that would have been a lot harder to find out from the environment alone, like evacuation routes, additional backstory, and other tidbits of information about locations and characters that weren't shown or talked about in-game. The environmental storytelling was sadly quite sparse in Tears of the Kingdom. We know next to nothing about the imprisoning war and how it played out. There's no path of destruction to follow, no eyewitness accounts or documentation, no records aside from the mural and a few written and spoken words, which only present a surface-level view at best. The same goes for the general history of the Zonai, or all the new ruins both in the underground and in the sky, most of which lack sufficient context. If you're still wondering why there haven't been as many Tears of the Kingdom theories as you expected there to be since the game came out, well, that's one of the main reasons. There is simply very little to work with, and the few subjects that are interesting and workable have been covered pretty extensively by this point. I know this hasn't stopped people from making Tears of the Kingdom theories regardless, and I commend those who can find the creativity and motivation to do so. I'm also not oblivious to the fact that there are plenty of fans who are satisfied with the story and lore that was presented, hence why the title of this video has the word fix in quotation marks, because whether there's something to fix or not is a matter of opinion. I myself have been struggling pretty hard to find new and interesting things to theorize about for the game, without grasping at straws or resorting to random guesswork, which often ends up feeling like a stretch. Despite the fact that this is ultimately a fictional world, I do value evidence-based ideas over random headcanon. For me, there's definitely a lot of stuff missing, and so the upcoming book will need to do some pretty heavy lifting in the information department, much more than creating a champion had to do. Of course, any information is better than no information at all. Obviously, I would have preferred if the game itself had a bit more substance and didn't have to rely too much on complementary material, or if the lore was expanded through DLC, but it doesn't change the fact that I am very happy with the announcement of the book. It presents a second chance for people like me to get reinvested in the lore of Tears of the Kingdom, some extra fuel to kickstart the engine, so to speak. I'm also excited for any kind of update to the general Zelda timeline, whatever that ends up being. I've never been a huge stickler for the timeline, and timeline placement has never been my biggest concern for Tears of the Kingdom, or any Zelda game for that matter, but it has been years since we had a proper update, so it's nice to get some new info regardless. Whatever the book may hold, I suspect that there will be a wealth of information and lore to be found. I mean, just from this single page, we've already learned a few interesting details that were either unknown or lacked sufficient evidence, and there's 464 pages to look forward to. The impact the previous books have had on the lore should not be underestimated. I can think of dozens of Zelda theories that would either be non-existent or at least a lot less convincing without them. The book may even provide small hints as to what to expect from the next Zelda game in the form of unused assets and scrapped ideas, like there were in creating a champion. Will it satisfy everyone? Will it answer every question or fix every plot hole? Probably not, but it doesn't have to. Zelda fans have always been able to craft new ideas and interesting premises no matter how little information or clarification Nintendo provides. Where there's a will, there's always a way to make it work. I just hope the book will make things a little easier for us. And that wraps up today's video. As always, a big thanks to my Patreons and members, and to you for watching. I hope you have a great week, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.